What's the creepiest thing that has ever happened to you? It was the night before my stepmom died, lost her battle to cancer. I was 22, was spending the night in bed with my 9-year-old half-brother, cuddling him and telling him his mom was gonna be okay, it wasn't gonna hurt anymore. It's about 3 a.m. at the time, and after a while he immediately sits upright in bed, smiles, says I promise to be a good boy, mommy. I love you. Now my stepmom has been bedridden for the last month, so she's not moving anywhere. But I swear on my life, and my little brother agrees with me, for a split second I saw her standing in the doorway wearing her big giant fur coat, just smiling at us and just looking relieved. Brother went to sleep about 2 minutes later. I left to go into my dad and stepmom's room to check on her to see my dad awake and telling me she died about half an hour ago. I genuinely believe she stopped by on her way to the other side to check in on her 2 kids and make sure we'd be okay without her before she left. I was working in Lagos, Nigeria, sitting in a bar on one of the lagoons near Lekki when a body washed up naked except for underwear. I called the waitress over a bit frantically and pointed at the body. She pulled a face and went back into the bar where I was expecting that she would call the police, but no. She returned with a long stick with a nail on the end, stabbed into his arse, and pushed him out like there was something. When I was a teenager, I used to keep the remote to my stereo on the lip of my bed frame. One night around midnight, I woke up to my stereo playing static at me. Only it was getting louder. I could see the volume number moving higher and higher. So it's pitch black and this static is getting louder and louder and the remote wasn't in its usual place for some reason. I had no choice but to jump out of bed to turn it off. I turned on the light and, freaking out, found it under my bed. Like, deep under my bed at that little point that's super hard to reach. When I was 16, I skipped school to stay home and play video games. I set up my PlayStation and made some hot pockets, and right when I get good and comfortable I hear footsteps walking to my room. I glance outside and see my parents aren't home yet, but was still afraid I was going to get caught. Seeing no place to hide, I froze. Suddenly the door was flung open and I heard a blood-curdling scream echo through the house. I must have sat there petrified in that room for half an hour before going outside and waiting for my parents to come home. I tried to explain to my friends later what happened, but they thought I was just doing some bullshit from my room. Was walking through the Rockies and managed to tear the muscle on the side of my foot, so was hobbling back. I was on my own like a moron. In the space of hobbling back to Jasper, I saw a white bear, think they are called spirit bears, just sitting watching me. Literally thought, fuck sake, I'm gonna die here mauled by a bear and no one knows where I am. But it just sat there and pawed the dirt in the direction of the town. I limped on keeping an eye on it and it just watched me. Then I swear to God, no more than 5 minutes later a fucking wolf appears limping exactly on the same foot I'm limping on, eyes me up and continues on its journey. I think I was even too pathetic to bother with this memorial of that story. I was petrified though either way. I was a missionary in South Africa. One of the creepiest things that happened to me was on New Year's Eve. During that night, I woke up feeling really thirsty. I walked toward the refrigerator in the kitchen, and as I was drinking water, I turned around and the front door was wide open. I could see the stars in the black sky and hear the faint sound of crickets in the distance. Not thinking anything of it, I closed it and went back to bed. In the morning, my missionary companion woke up first and noticed the door was wide open. It was then that we realized we had been robbed throughout the night, and I still remember my heart dropping as I realized the perpetrators were most likely in the dark house while I was in the kitchen in the middle of the night. Still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. I was maybe 4 or 5. We lived in a somewhat questionable neighborhood at the time. And looking out the window one night, I swear I saw a neighbor from an app nearby with her son. He was on one of those plastic trikes. I believe she ran inside to grab a jacket. In the 3 minutes she was gone, a vehicle pulled up and snatched the kid and took off. His mom came back and was looking for him. I tried to tell the adults in my app, but no one believed me or the other kids with us. Still the scariest thing in house to this day. I don't know what it was because I don't remember it, because I was a baby/toddler, but my mom certainly does and mentions it occasionally. I was her first kid, and when I was born my parents lived in a little old house in Scotland. Mom says that really quite often, both I and the dog would stop whatever we were doing at the same time and both look towards the stairs as if we were watching something either descend or ascend them. This is corroborated by my dad and a few of their friends who saw it happening. It's basically their friend group's weird inexplicable story, I just happen to be an unwitting part of it. Unfortunately, I have no memory of this at all and the dog in question died 30 years ago, so they'll never get their answer. Myself, wife and kids were driving near some cliffs near where we live. We stopped to take in the view and some photos. I lined the kids up with the cliff drop and ocean behind them and took some pics. As they took a step back for me to get a better picture, they fell at the edge of the cliff. I woke up sweating and petrified. The nightmare felt so real, one of those that really stick with you. I went for a pee and checked in on all the kids, all fast asleep in bed, apart from my youngest 5-year-old daughter. She was on the floor. She had fallen out of bed but somehow was still sleeping. Next to her on the floor, knocked over I assume when she fell, was a bedside lamp. The bulb from the lamp had burnt / was singeing into the carpet, I think ready to burst into flames. My sister saw something on several occasions throughout our lives. I never actually saw anything, only heard something extremely vividly. Basically, one night everything was happening like usual. My mom was out with her friends watching some game, and my dad was watching a movie with my sister and I. It was a comedy, so we all went to bed laughing about it. I was lying in bed about half an hour after we were tucked in, reading a book. I heard somebody stomping down the hallway downstairs, and then full-on sprinting up the stairs. I figured it was just my sister coming back from getting a drink or something, but I would have seen her leave her room because our doors are right beside each other, and the staircase is just around the corner. So then I figured it was just my mom coming back home and for some reason being extremely loud. The way my door is angled lets me see anybody who comes up the stairs, so I was watching and waiting as they seemed to be in quite a hurry. The footsteps were getting higher and higher up the stairs, but as soon as they got to the top, they completely stopped. There was nothing. My eyes were still totally fixed on the hallway as I got up to check who it was. I turned the corner and there was nobody. I immediately got covered head to toe with goosebumps, and tried to piece together what could have happened. Not even 2 seconds later I hear my sister screaming and she comes bolting out of her room with complete terror on her face. Without hesitating we run into our dad's room, where he is already standing up and asking what's wrong. My sister points back to her room crying, and says there's a man. My dad rushes into the hall, turns the light on, and then turns the light on in her room. He checks the closet and behind everything but doesn't find anything. Then he walks into my room and does the same, but still finds nothing. We spent the next 15 or so minutes holding his hand as he searched the rest of the house, flicking every single light on. He calls my mom to see if she had been home, but she says she's still with her friends. I could even hear the loud bar atmosphere through the phone speaker. We all slept in my dad's room that night. Over the course of the next 7 or so years, my sister had run out of her room crying about the same man in her room. She says he just stands there in the corner and watches her. She described him as a very tall man in a top hat and a trench coat, like a detective, she said. Everything completely black. It was a couple years after that I stumbled upon what's known as the Top Hat Demon, or the Phantom Hat Man. It turns out it's an actual phenomenon. Every description I'm drawing is exactly what she described that day. A few years ago, my wife and I spent 3 months in Bermuda for work. Initially, we rented a large detached house whose owners were back in the States. There was one locked room on the top floor, presumably containing the owner's personal possessions. After a few nights, we both began to hear footsteps from upstairs. This was relatively easy to ignore as we put it down to rodents even though they sounded human, long footsteps and heavy. We had checked the locked door and there was never any sign of movement there. One night I was asleep when, in my dazed state, I imagined somebody right by my face shouting, "Wake up." This was from my right side. My wife was sleeping to my left. Immediately after I felt myself pulled down the bed. I awoke to find my legs hanging off the end of the bed and my right cheek moist as if somebody had shouted at me from 6 inches and their saliva had sprayed my face. I panicked, woke up my wife and checked the room but there was nobody there. I checked the rest of the house and all was quiet. I washed my face quite vigorously after though. We left the house soon after that night and claimed the company flag as soon as it became available. Never had anything like that happen to me before or since. I was working at a bakery on third shift, 8 p.m. to 4 a.m., at the local orchard. The store closed at 8, but it wasn't unheard of for the owners to come in after closing. I had been working there for about a week at this point. I was out stocking the shelves, so it was close to the end of our shift, so probably 3 a.m.-ish. I turned to take something off of the rack and there was a man standing by the cold case. He was late 40s/early 50s, bald, thin/average build, wearing a red flannel shirt tucked into jeans. He said, "Hello, how are you?" I said, "Hi. I'm doing well, how are you?" He said, "I'm fine, thank you." I put the bread on the shelf, and turned to ask who he was/introduce myself, and he was gone. I was only turned for a few seconds, so there's no way he could have left my line of sight without me seeing some part of him leaving, and I never heard any doors open or close to indicate that he left or went elsewhere in the store. I told my mom when I got home because I was like, what if someone broke in? Do I want to work at a place where people can just easily waltz in undetected? She asked me about it. I told her it was weird because he was just standing there looking at a covered-up cold case so he couldn't see what was actually in it, and he didn't seem like he was trying to steal anything. She told me it was probably just the owner. I met the owner a few days later. He was not the man that I saw there a few nights prior. It wasn't anyone that worked there. I had heard from coworkers that the owner was still working there because his son that was supposed to take over the business had died of cancer. That night after work I went home and looked up the signs of Victoria and I showed you it was the guy I saw in the store. I've had scarier, but this just happened to my brother and me 2 weeks ago. I wake up from my nap to my phone ringing. I answer it and my bro in a worried voice says, "Can you come to the office? There's a naked dude outside messing with my car and pounding on the door." In my barely conscious state, I just laugh at him and say call the police if there is a real problem. 2 minutes later I'm actually awake and think shit. He sounded legitimately worried. I grab the pepper spray and speed over to the office. The naked guy was gone by the time I got there, fortunately. My brother had called the police, but they never came. We checked out the car to see what the guy was doing to it, and all we found was "help" and me written over and over again in oil. Edit: the police eventually called us back and just said we've been looking for that guy. We assumed that since we never actually showed up to the office, they found him on the way. Kind of a scene, kind of an experience. When I was about 15 years old, school night, I woke up in the middle of the night. I remember looking at the clock. It was about 1:30 a.m. I went to the kitchen to make some hot tea to take back to bed with me. Now, our kitchen was attached to the dining room, which was a step down from the kitchen. The kitchen and the dining room both had large sliding glass doors and big windows facing the backyard, all on the same wall. The cabinets and counter where we kept the tea was opposite the wall of windows, and it made a little corner. I remember walking into the kitchen with the lights off, going to the tea corner of the kitchen, and then standing in the corner looking at the windows and sliding glass doors. I felt like someone was watching me through them. I got that gut feeling, you know the one. I stood there for about a minute. Very still, like maybe they wouldn't see me if I didn't move. Then I went back to my room, without making the tea. When I got back to my room, the clock read 5 a.m. I had been standing in the kitchen for 3.5 hours. And I had no idea how that was possible, because it only felt like maybe a minute. To this day, it is still the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me. My mom never believed me when I told her because she never felt anything bad in our house. I never believed it, but that night I absolutely did.